My stepson put lavender in my shampoo knowing I'm deathly allergic, so I'm making his life hell. My 16-year-old stepson is the most entitled nightmare I've ever encountered. When I married his father 3 years ago, he called me a homewrecker day one, even though his mother cheated and caused the divorce. I tried everything. Went to his basketball games, he ignored me. Planned activities, he'd bail to smoke with friends. Meanwhile, he verbally abuses me, uses racial slurs he calls jokes, and orders me around like a servant. "Get me McDonald's," he'll demand, then clap his hands. His father laughs, thinks it's hilarious. The physical stuff started small, slapping my butt, flicking my temple. His father calls it rebellious teenager behavior. Last week at dinner, stepson mentioned getting in trouble for BS reasons, bullying a poor kid at school. I just make jokes about his clothes. Not my fault he's broke and sensitive. His father backed him up. Schools are too sensitive. Kids need to toughen up. I snapped. Ironic when your kid is the most spoiled brat I've ever met. Stepson flipped his chair and stormed out. Husband and I fought all night. I was ready for divorce. Then the next day happened. I'm severely allergic to lavender. My skin breaks into painful hives that last weeks. I'd told them both multiple times. Got in the shower, used my body wash like always. Within minutes, I was covered in burning, itching hives. Full body allergic reaction. I checked the bottle, no lavender listed. Checked online, no lavender in the ingredients. Walking past stepson's open door, I saw it on his desk. Dried lavender. Left out in plain sight like a trophy. I emptied my shampoo bottle. At the bottom, more dried lavender. He'd deliberately poisoned me, then displayed the evidence to taunt me. I took photos of everything. The lavender on his desk, the contaminated bottles, my hives which were spreading up my neck toward my face. Documented it all. But I didn't tell my husband. Not yet. See, I realized something. My husband would minimize this too. Call it a prank. Say I'm overreacting. Maybe even blame me for not locking up my toiletries. So I started my revenge quietly. First, I replaced his expensive pre-workout with salt. Watched him gag at the gym, confused why his $80 supplement tasted like ocean water. Then I put hair removal cream in his styling gel. Just a little. Not enough to make him bald. Just enough for mysterious thinning that's driving him insane. His PlayStation account got mysteriously banned after someone reported him for the racist messages I screenshotted him sending. 3-month ban. He's losing his mind. I've been slowly increasing the temperature on his phone charger with a modifier app. His phone overheats constantly now. He's on his 3rd replacement. The basketball shoes he loves? I've been loosening the stitching. They'll fall apart mid-game soon. His college recommendation letter from his favorite teacher? I may have forwarded her the screenshots of him bragging about bullying that poor kid. She withdrew the recommendation. But the masterpiece, I found his burner Instagram where he sells weed to kids at school. Screenshot sent anonymously to the principal and school resource officer. That investigation starts Monday. His father still doesn't know about the lavender. I'm saving that revelation for court. See, attempted poisoning is assault. With my medical records showing severe allergic reaction, the photos, and his history of escalating violence, my lawyer says I'll get everything. The house, alimony, and a restraining order against stepson. They think I'm weak because I took the abuse quietly. But I'm not weak. I was planning. Tomorrow, when the school calls about the drug investigation, when his PlayStation account stays banned, when his college dreams crumble, when his shoes fall apart at the championship game, when his father gets served divorce papers citing attempted assault with a known allergen, then they'll understand that the sensitive homewrecker they mocked was actually documenting everything. Building a case. Destroying them legally while they laughed at their own cruelty. The lavender is still on his desk. He looks at it and smirks every morning, thinking he won. He has no idea that little pile of dried flowers is about to cost him everything. Monday morning, the alarm pulled me out of sleep at 6:30. I rolled over and grabbed my phone to shut it off, and through the half-open door across the hall, I could see his desk. The lavender was still there, just sitting out in the open like a trophy, those dried purple flowers he'd used to poison me. Today was the day everything I'd been planning would start to happen. The school would call about the Instagram account. His father would finally see that his perfect son wasn't so perfect. I felt cold and calm, like ice water running through my veins instead of blood. He had no idea what was coming for him. I got up and went to the bathroom, washed my face, brushed my teeth. In the mirror, I could still see faint marks on my neck from where the hives had been worst. The doctor said they might scar. Good. More evidence for court. I went downstairs and started the coffee maker, got out the bread for toast. My husband came down first, already dressed for work in his polo shirt and khakis. He poured himself coffee and sat at the table scrolling through his phone. Then I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs and my stepson appeared, wearing basketball shorts and a hoodie. He grabbed a bowl and poured cereal, splashing milk everywhere and not cleaning it up. I sat down with my tablet and pretended to read the news. My stepson kept looking at me over his cereal bowl with this little smirk on his face, like we shared a secret, like he thought the Lavender thing was funny. I smiled back at him, sweet and pleasant, and his smirk faded into confusion. He probably expected me to be scared or angry. Instead, I just sipped my coffee and went back to my tablet. The confusion on his face made the cold feeling in my chest spread wider. At 8:47 exactly, my husband's phone rang. He looked at the screen and frowned. School was calling. I watched his face while he answered. First, he looked annoyed, like this was interrupting his morning. Then confused, his eyebrows pulling together. Then angry, his jaw getting tight. He stood up from the table and walked into the living room, but I could still hear every word. The principal was talking loud enough that her voice carried. Something about a serious disciplinary matter. Drug-related activities. Need him to come to the school immediately. My husband came back to the kitchen looking like someone had punched him. He stared at his son for a long moment. My stepson's face had gone completely white. All the color just drained right out of his skin. His spoon was frozen halfway to his mouth. My husband told him to get in the car right now. My stepson started protesting that he didn't do anything, his voice getting higher and more frantic with every word. He kept saying it wasn't fair, that someone was lying, that the school had it wrong. I just sat there sipping my coffee and reading about local weather on my tablet. Didn't say a single word. My husband told him they were leaving now and to stop arguing. My stepson looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something change in his eyes, like a little spark of suspicion. But he couldn't prove anything. I smiled at him again and wished them both a good day. After the door slammed and I heard the car start in the driveway, I pulled out my phone. Texted Melissa that the first domino had fallen. She replied within 30 seconds saying Hugo had finished putting together all the extra evidence over the weekend. Everything was ready for filing whenever I gave her the word. I sat there for a minute just breathing, feeling my heartbeat steady and calm in my chest. Then I went upstairs to my office and closed the door. I'd been keeping everything organized in a hidden folder on my computer, but today I needed physical copies. Printed out every single photo of the Lavender on his desk. Printed the pictures of my hives, the angry red welts covering my arms and neck and face. Printed screenshots of the racist messages he'd sent on PlayStation. Printed the videos I'd secretly recorded on my phone of him calling me names and ordering me around. Got my medical records from the allergist showing my severe lavender allergy. Put everything into labeled folders with dates and descriptions. Made 3 copies of everything. 1 set went in my safe deposit box at the bank. 1 set went to Melissa's office. 1 set stayed locked in my desk drawer. By the time I finished, it was almost 11. I made myself a sandwich and ate it standing at the kitchen counter. At 11:30, my husband called. His voice sounded strange, tight, and stressed. He said the school had found evidence that our stepson was dealing drugs. Suspended pending investigation. The police might get involved. He asked me if I knew anything about this. I looked across the hall at his son's room, at the Lavender still sitting on that desk, and said I had no idea. That I was shocked. That I couldn't believe it. My husband sighed and said he had to go. They were still at the school dealing with everything. When they came home at 1:15, I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. My stepson walked right past me without looking, went straight to his room and slammed the door so hard that the picture frames on the hallway wall rattled. My husband stood in the doorway looking like he'd aged 10 years in 5 hours. He asked if we could talk later after he had time to process everything. I said of course and went back to chopping carrots. Through the wall, I could hear my stepson on his phone. His voice was loud and frantic, calling someone and demanding to know who reported him. Then another call. Then another. His voice kept cracking between rage and panic. I realized this was probably the first time in his entire life that he'd faced real consequences for anything he'd done. His father had always protected him, made excuses, blamed other people. Now the school had proof and his father couldn't make it go away. I kept chopping vegetables and listening to him fall apart in the next room. That evening, I set the table for dinner like always. Called up the stairs that food was ready. My husband came down looking exhausted. My stepson didn't come out of his room. My husband sat at the table picking at his chicken and rice, barely eating anything. He kept asking how this could have happened, wondering if maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe someone set his son up. Maybe the evidence was fake. I ate my dinner and listened to him try to make sense of it. Watched him search for a way to make his son innocent again. He asked if I thought someone might have a grudge against his son. If maybe another kid planted evidence. I said I didn't know. that it seemed like the school must have pretty solid proof to suspend him. My husband nodded slowly, but I could see he didn't want to believe it. Upstairs, I could still hear my stepson pacing in his room, his footsteps heavy on the floor above us. I set my fork down and looked across the table at my husband, who was still picking at his chicken. The silence felt heavy between us except for the sound of footsteps upstairs. My husband kept running his hand through his hair and staring at his plate like the answers might be written there in the rice. I cleared my throat softly and said maybe the school wouldn't suspend him if they didn't have real proof. My husband's head snapped up and his face got tight. He told me I didn't understand how schools work these days, and how kids make up stories about each other all the time. Said teenagers are vindictive and his son probably just made someone mad. I nodded slowly and made my face look concerned while thinking about the screenshots sitting in Hugo's files. All those transactions with timestamps and usernames. All those messages about meeting spots and prices. My husband kept talking about how unfair everything was, and I just kept nodding and eating my dinner. Upstairs, the pacing stopped and I heard a door slam. My husband flinched at the sound but didn't get up to check on his son. I finished eating and started clearing the table while my husband sat there looking defeated. He thanked me for listening and said he didn't know what he'd do without my support. I smiled and told him we'd get through this together. The words tasted wrong in my mouth, but I kept my face calm. Tuesday morning, I woke up to shouting from downstairs. I checked my phone and saw it was barely 7:30. I got dressed quickly and went down to find my stepson standing in the living room holding his game controller. His face was red and he was yelling about how his PlayStation account was still banned. He kept pressing buttons and staring at the screen like he could force it to work. My husband came out of the kitchen in his work clothes and told his son to calm down. My stepson threw the controller on the couch and started pacing. He said everything was going wrong all at once and it wasn't fair. His voice kept getting louder and higher. My husband's jaw tightened and he said his son needed to focus on the school situation first because that was more important than video games. My stepson stopped pacing and stared at his father like he'd been slapped. I stood in the doorway watching them and keeping my face neutral. My husband told his son to get ready for school, and they'd talk about everything later. My stepson grabbed his backpack and stormed out the front door without eating breakfast. The house felt quieter after he left. I waited until my husband left for work before I got in my car. The drive to Melissa's office took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Her building was downtown in a cluster of professional offices with big glass windows. I parked in the visitor lot and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The waiting room had gray chairs and magazines nobody ever read. The receptionist smiled and told me Melissa was ready. I followed her back to a corner office with a big desk and bookshelves full of legal books. Melissa stood up and shook my hand. She had dark hair pulled back and wore a navy suit. I sat down across from her and pulled out the folder I'd brought. She took it and started going through everything slowly. Photos of the lavender on his desk, pictures of my hives covering my arms and neck, medical records from my allergist showing the severity of my allergy, screenshots of the racist PlayStation messages, videos I'd taken secretly of my stepson ordering me around and calling me names. Melissa spread everything out on her desk and studied each piece. She looked up at me after maybe 10 minutes and said we had an incredibly strong case. She said the attempted poisoning evidence combined with the documented abuse history would get me everything I wanted. Divorce with a restraining order against my stepson, the house, alimony. She asked if I was ready to move forward. I told her yes. She nodded and said she'd start preparing the paperwork. We talked for another hour about timelines and what to expect in court. When I left her office, the sun felt brighter somehow. That evening, I was making dinner when the phone rang. My husband answered it in the living room and I heard his voice get tense. He came into the kitchen still holding his phone and said the school wanted another meeting tomorrow with both parents. He looked tired and stressed, asked if I would come with him for support. I wiped my hands on a towel and said of course I would. He thanked me and went back to the living room. I stood at the counter chopping vegetables and thinking about what Melissa had said. About appearing cooperative until we filed the papers. About documenting everything, including how helpful I was being during this crisis. I could hear my husband on the phone in the other room probably calling his lawyer. My stepson came home around 6 and went straight to his room without speaking to either of us. I set the table for 3, but only 2 of us ate. During dinner, my stepson's phone started making weird noises from upstairs. Then I heard him yell. A few seconds later, there was a crash. My husband put down his fork and looked at the ceiling. My stepson came storming down the stairs holding his phone. The screen was black and smoke was coming from the charging port. He was shaking with anger. Said his phone was overheating again, and now it was completely dead. My husband's face changed. He stood up and told his son to get it together. Actually yelled at him. Said he needed to stop breaking things and acting like a child and focus on the serious problems they were dealing with. My stepson's mouth fell open. I realized this was the first time I'd ever heard my husband really discipline him. My stepson threw the dead phone on the counter and went back upstairs. My husband sat back down and put his head in his hands. I ate my dinner and didn't say anything. Wednesday morning, I woke up early and got dressed for the school meeting. I was in the bathroom doing my makeup when I heard weird sounds from my stepson's room. Drawers opening and closing, things being moved around. I walked past his door on my way downstairs and saw him pulling books off his shelf and looking behind them. His desk was a mess with papers everywhere. He looked frantic. I kept walking and made coffee in the kitchen. Later, when we were all in the car heading to the school, I realized what he'd been searching for. The lavender. He must have finally figured out that the evidence of what he did to me was sitting right there on his desk where anyone could see it, where I'd photographed it from multiple angles with timestamps. I almost smiled but caught myself. My husband was driving and my stepson sat in the back seat staring out the window. Nobody talked the whole drive. The school meeting was in a conference room near the principal's office. Francine Walker was already there when we arrived. She was maybe 50 with gray hair and glasses. Nathaniel Barnes sat next to her in his uniform. He was the school resource officer and he had a folder in front of him that looked thick. We all sat down around the table. My husband and stepson on one side. Me on the other side next to the door. Francine Walker started talking about the investigation. Said they'd found substantial evidence that my stepson was using a secret Instagram account to sell marijuana to other students. Nathaniel Barnes opened his folder and pulled out printed screenshots. Transaction messages with times and dates. Photos of cash and small bags. Messages where my stepson discussed prices and meeting locations. He spread them across the table. My husband's face went pale as he looked at everything. He kept saying there must be some mistake. Nathaniel Barnes said there was no mistake. They'd verified the account belonged to my stepson through IP addresses and device information. My stepson sat there with his arms crossed tight against his chest. He wouldn't look at anyone. Just stared at the wall with his jaw clenched. Francine Walker said the suspension would continue pending the investigation. My husband started arguing that his son was a good kid who made one mistake. Nathaniel Barnes cut him off and said this wasn't one mistake. Said the account showed months of activity with dozens of transactions. The door opened and the guidance counselor came in. She was younger than Francine Walker with blonde hair. She sat down at the end of the table and looked uncomfortable. Francine Walker asked her to explain about the recommendation letter. The guidance counselor looked at my stepson and said she was withdrawing the letter she'd written for his college applications. Said she'd been made aware of other behavioral issues, including bullying another student. My stepson's face changed. His arms dropped to his sides. For the first time since this all started, I saw him look actually scared instead of just angry. His eyes got wide and his mouth opened, but no sound came out. My husband asked what behavioral issues. The guidance counselor said she couldn't discuss another student's situation, but that she'd received credible information about my stepson's conduct. My stepson finally spoke. Said this wasn't fair and everyone was against him. His voice cracked on the last word. The guidance counselor said she had to make decisions based on character, and she couldn't in good conscience recommend him anymore. My stepson put his head down on the table. His shoulders were shaking. Nathaniel Barnes cleared his throat and everyone looked at him. He said he was forwarding all the evidence to the district attorney's office. Said there would likely be charges filed related to drug distribution to minors. The word charges seemed to hang in the air. My husband went completely white. Started talking fast about how his son was only 16 and this would ruin his future. Said surely there was some way to handle this without involving prosecutors. Nathaniel Barnes said that decision wasn't up to the school. Said when drugs are involved on campus, they have to report it to law enforcement. My husband kept trying to argue. Kept saying his son made a mistake, but he wasn't a criminal. Francine Walker said the meeting was over and they'd be in touch about next steps. We all stood up. My stepson walked out first without waiting for us. I got to the car before them, sat in the front seat and watched through the windshield as my husband and stepson stood in the parking lot. My stepson was yelling. I couldn't hear the words through the closed windows, but I could see his mouth moving fast and his hands waving around. My husband kept trying to put his hand on his son's shoulder, but my stepson kept jerking away. Other parents were walking past them to their cars. Some were staring. My husband looked around and seemed to realize they were making a scene. He said something and pointed at the car. My stepson yelled something back. His face was bright red and tears were running down his cheeks. My husband's shoulders slumped. He looked defeated, helpless. My stepson kept yelling about how everything was ruined and it wasn't fair. How his whole life was falling apart. My husband just stood there taking it. Finally, my stepson turned and started walking toward the student parking lot. My husband called after him, but he didn't stop. My husband stood there alone for a minute before walking back to the car. He got in and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. I asked if his son was okay. My husband said he didn't know anymore. We drove home in silence. My husband kept his hands tight on the wheel and his jaw clenched. I stared out the window and thought about how his son was probably searching his room right now for something to break or someone to blame. When we pulled into the driveway, my stepson's car was already there. My husband turned off the engine but didn't move. I asked if he was coming inside. He said he needed a minute. I got out and walked to the house alone. Inside, I heard drawers slamming upstairs. My stepson was tearing through his room looking for something. I went to the kitchen and poured myself water. The slamming stopped. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. My stepson appeared in the doorway holding his basketball shoes, the expensive ones I'd been working on for weeks. He was staring at the sole where the stitching had started to come loose. His face was red and his eyes were wild. He asked what I did to his shoes. I looked at him confused and asked what he meant. He held them up and showed me the loose threads. Said they were fine yesterday and now they're falling apart right before Friday's championship game. I told him shoes wear out sometimes. He threw them on the floor and called me a liar. Said everything was fine until I came into his life. My husband came through the door then, asked what was going on. My stepson pointed at his shoes and said I sabotaged them. My husband picked up one of the shoes and looked at it, turned it over in his hands. I could see him trying to figure out if his son was being paranoid or if there was something actually wrong. He asked when I would have had time to mess with the shoes. My stepson said I had plenty of time while they were at the school, that I was trying to ruin everything for him. My husband looked at me. I shrugged and said the shoes were probably just cheaply made. My stepson lost it, started screaming that I was a liar and everyone believed me over him, that his whole life was falling apart and it was all my fault. My husband told him to calm down. My stepson said he wouldn't calm down because nobody was listening to him. He stormed back upstairs and slammed his door so hard the whole house shook. My husband stood there holding the shoe. He looked tired, old, like he'd aged 5 years in one day. He asked if I really didn't touch the shoes. I met his eyes and said I didn't touch his shoes, which was technically true. I'd touched the stitching, not the shoes themselves. He nodded slowly and set the shoe on the counter. Said his son was under a lot of stress. I agreed that he probably was. My husband went to the living room and turned on the TV. I stayed in the kitchen and pulled out my phone. Texted Melissa that things were getting worse at home. She responded immediately asking if I felt safe. I looked toward the living room where my husband sat staring at nothing. Looked up at the ceiling where my stepson was probably plotting his next move. Texted back that I wasn't sure anymore. Melissa said I told her I'd think about it. Put my phone away and started making dinner even though nobody would eat it. That night, I called Monica Sharma from my car in the driveway. Told her about the school meeting and the shoe incident and how my stepson was getting more desperate. She asked if I felt safe at home. Same question Melissa had asked. I realized I'd been asked that twice in one day and still didn't have a good answer. Monica said that when people feel cornered, they often lash out. That my stepson had lost his reputation, his college prospects, and his sense of control all in 1 week. She asked what I thought he might do next. I said I didn't know, but I was documenting everything just in case. She asked if I had a safety plan. I admitted I didn't. She walked me through making one. Where I would go if things escalated, who I would call, what I would take with me. By the time we hung up, I had a bag packed in my car trunk with clothes and my important documents, just in case. Thursday morning, my stepson got a phone call at breakfast. He looked at the screen and his face changed, answered it and said hello in a careful voice. Listened for a minute, said yes, he could come by, hung up and told my husband his teacher wanted to see him. My husband asked which teacher. My stepson said his favorite one, the one who wrote his recommendation letter. My husband's face brightened a little, said maybe she wanted to talk about the situation, help him figure things out. My stepson didn't look hopeful. He looked scared. He left 20 minutes later. I cleaned up breakfast and waited. My husband went to his home office to work. I sat in the living room pretending to read. 2 hours passed. The front door opened. My stepson came in and walked straight past me without looking. His face was blank, empty, like someone had scooped out everything inside him. My husband came out of his office asking how it went. My stepson stopped on the stairs, said she withdrew her recommendation letter. The words came out flat, emotionless. My husband froze, asked what he meant. My stepson turned around slowly, said the guidance counselor told her about everything, the drugs, the bullying. She couldn't recommend him anymore, said it went against her values. My husband started saying they'd figure something out, that other teachers could write letters, that this wasn't the end of the world. My stepson's face twisted. He screamed that his father didn't understand anything, that his entire future was falling apart because of lies, that everyone believed the worst about him without giving him a chance. His voice cracked on the last word. My husband tried to walk toward him, but my stepson backed up the stairs, said his father never protected him from anything, never stood up for him when it mattered, just let everyone destroy his life. He disappeared upstairs. His door slammed. My husband stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking lost. I stayed on the couch. Didn't say anything. What could I say that wouldn't make it worse? Later that afternoon, I heard my stepson's voice through his door. He was on the phone. His tone was different, softer, almost childlike. I moved closer to listen. He was talking to his mother, begging her to help him, saying everyone was against him and nothing was fair, that the school was lying about the drugs, that his stepmother poisoned everyone against him. His voice broke. He was crying. Actually crying. I heard him say please over and over. Please believe me. Please help me. Please make this stop. I stood outside his door feeling something complicated twist in my chest. This was what I wanted. To watch him break. To see him lose everything like he'd tried to make me lose everything. But hearing him cry to his mother made me feel strange. Not guilty exactly. Just aware that I'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. I went back downstairs. My husband was drinking beer on the couch even though it was only 4 p.m. I asked if he was okay. He didn't answer. Friday morning arrived. My stepson came downstairs dressed in his basketball uniform. His eyes were red, but his jaw was set. My husband asked if he was sure he wanted to play. My stepson said he had to. This was the championship game. Scouts would be there. He couldn't miss it. My husband nodded. Said he'd be there cheering him on. My stepson looked at me. Asked if I was coming. I said I wouldn't miss it. Something flickered in his eyes. Suspicion, maybe? Or fear. He left for school early. My husband and I drove separately to the game that evening. The tension between us felt thick enough to choke on. The gymnasium was already packed when I arrived. Parents filled the bleachers. Students crowded along the walls. I spotted 2 men in the corner with clipboards. Scouts. My stepson was warming up on the court. He looked focused, aggressive, like he was trying to prove something to everyone watching. The game started. My stepson played hard. Too hard. He was pushing other players and taking wild shots. The coach kept yelling at him to slow down, to play smart. He wasn't listening. Halfway through the second quarter, he got the ball and drove toward the basket. Jumped high for a layup. His shoe exploded. The sole separated from the upper and flapped loose. He landed wrong, stumbled. The shoe fell completely apart on his foot. The whole gymnasium saw it. Parents gasped. Students laughed. The other team grabbed the ball and scored while my stepson stood there in one shoe staring at the pieces on the floor. The coach called timeout. My stepson limped to the bench. His face was bright red. The coach was talking to him, but my stepson just sat there with his head in his hands. They tried to tape the shoe back together, but it was useless. The stitching had given way completely. My stepson sat on the bench for the rest of the game. His teammates played without him. They were losing. The scouts in the corner made notes on their clipboards and left before the fourth quarter ended. My husband got up and walked out. I stayed until the final buzzer. Watched my stepson sitting there alone while his team lost by 15 points. At home that night, my stepson wouldn't come out of his room. My husband sat on the couch with another beer, then another. He stared at the TV, but I don't think he was seeing it. I made dinner that nobody ate. Around midnight, I walked past my husband still on the couch. He was looking at nothing. His eyes were distant, calculating. I realized he was starting to see it. How everything was falling apart at once. How the timing was too perfect. How his son's perfect life was crumbling in ways that seemed almost planned. He looked at me. Really looked at me. I met his eyes and didn't look away. Something passed between us. An understanding, maybe. Or an accusation. I went upstairs to bed. Left him sitting there in the dark with his beer and his suspicions and the pieces of his son's life scattered all around him. Saturday morning, I woke up to find my husband already in the kitchen making coffee. He stood at the counter with his back to me, shoulders tight. I poured myself a cup and sat at the table. He turned around and looked at me for a long moment. Then he asked if I thought it was strange that everything was going wrong for his son at once. His voice was careful, testing. I met his eyes and kept my face neutral. I asked what he was implying. My voice came out steady with just the right amount of hurt. He blinked and his jaw worked like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite say. I waited. Let the silence stretch between us. Finally, I added that if he was suggesting I had something to do with his son's problems, that was pretty insulting considering I'd been nothing but supportive through all of this. He backed down immediately, put his hands up and said he was sorry, said the stress was making him paranoid, that he didn't mean anything by it. But I saw it in his eyes. The doubt, the suspicion he couldn't quite articulate or prove. He was starting to see the pattern even if he couldn't connect the dots. I nodded and said I understood he was under pressure. Reached across and squeezed his hand. Told him we'd get through this together. He squeezed back, but his eyes stayed distant, calculating. That afternoon, I was sitting on the couch with my laptop when I heard footsteps on the stairs. My stepson came down slowly, stopped at the bottom, and just stared at me. I looked up from my screen and smiled, asked if he needed something. He didn't answer right away, just kept staring with this new expression on his face. Something had shifted. The usual anger and contempt were still there, but underneath was something else. Wariness, maybe. Or the beginning of real fear. I realized he was starting to put pieces together about the timing of his disasters. The PlayStation ban right after the school investigation started. His phone problems getting worse each day. The shoes falling apart at the exact wrong moment. He was seeing it now. The pattern. I kept my expression open and friendly. Asked again if he was okay. He shook his head and asked if I had anything to do with his PlayStation getting banned, or his phone problems. The question came out aggressive, but I heard the uncertainty underneath. I let my face fall, looked confused and hurt, asked why he would think I even knew how to do things like that. Said I barely understood technology beyond basic email and social media. He stared at me for another long moment, searching my face for something. I held his gaze and let my eyes get a little wet, like I was about to cry from the accusation. He made a disgusted sound and stormed back upstairs, slammed his door hard enough to shake the walls. Sunday morning, I was in the kitchen making breakfast when I heard shouting from upstairs. My stepson's voice, high and panicked. I froze with the spatula in my hand and listened. He was yelling about someone reporting him to the school, about how he was going to find out who did it. My husband's footsteps pounded down the hallway and I heard him asking what was wrong. More shouting. My stepson saying he knew it was me, that I'd been planning this, that I was trying to ruin his life. I set down the spatula and walked to the bottom of the stairs. My husband appeared at the top looking exhausted, asked me to come up. I climbed the stairs slowly, found my stepson standing in his doorway with his phone in his hand. His face was red and his eyes were wild. He pointed at me and said I did this, that I reported him, that I was behind everything. My husband put a hand on his son's shoulder and asked him to calm down, to think about what he was saying. I stayed calm and asked what evidence he had. My voice was quiet, reasonable. My stepson sputtered and said he just knew. That it was too convenient. That everything started going wrong right after our fight at dinner. I tilted my head and asked how I would even know about his Instagram account. Said I didn't even follow him on social media because he'd blocked me years ago. My husband looked between us. The doubt was back in his eyes, but now it was mixed with something else. Confusion about who to believe. The argument escalated fast. My stepson got louder and more aggressive, started moving toward me. My husband stepped between us and told his son to back off. My stepson shoved past him and got right in my face, close enough that I could smell the stale sleep on his breath. He said he knew I did this, that he was going to prove it. I stood very still and kept my voice level. Said I didn't feel safe with these accusations flying around, that maybe I should go stay with my sister for the day. My husband agreed immediately, too quickly, like he was relieved to have an excuse to separate us. I went to our bedroom and packed an overnight bag while they argued in the hallway. My stepson was still shouting, still insisting I was behind everything. I walked past them without making eye contact. Heard my husband tell his son to go to his room. Heard the door slam again. I drove to a coffee shop instead of my sister's house. Sat in a corner booth and opened my laptop. Checked my email, scrolled through social media. Gave them 3 hours alone in the house. I knew what my stepson would do. He'd search my room, go through my computer, look for evidence to prove his theory. But I wasn't stupid enough to leave traces. Everything was backed up in cloud storage he couldn't access. The screenshots were on my lawyer's secure server. The photos were timestamped and stored with the medical records. He wouldn't find anything except normal everyday files and boring emails. When I finally drove back home around 6 that evening, my husband met me at the door. He looked apologetic, said his son had calmed down, that he was just stressed and lashing out because everything was falling apart. I nodded and said I understood. Went inside and saw my bedroom had been disturbed. Drawers not quite closed all the way. My laptop moved slightly from where I'd left it. The violation made something cold settle in my chest. Made my decision to file for divorce even easier. My husband followed me upstairs asking if I wanted to talk. I said I was tired, that we could talk tomorrow. He accepted that and left me alone. My stepson stayed locked in his room all evening. Didn't come down for dinner. I made pasta and ate alone at the kitchen table while my husband sat in the living room with his phone. The house felt heavy with suspicion and unspoken accusations. I cleaned up the dishes and went to bed early. I lay in the dark listening to my husband moving around downstairs. Heard him finally come up around midnight. He got into bed carefully. Didn't touch me. We lay there in the darkness on opposite sides of the mattress like strangers. Monday morning, I told my husband I was working from home. He looked relieved, probably glad he wouldn't have to navigate the tension between me and his son. They left together around 7:30. My stepson didn't look at me as he walked past. My husband kissed my forehead and said he'd call me later. I waited until I heard the car pull out of the driveway. Then I opened my laptop and checked my email. Found the message I'd been waiting for. Hugo Ortega had sent his final report. I downloaded the file and read through it carefully. He'd compiled everything. Screenshots of the Instagram account with timestamps. Messages between my stepson and buyers with clear drug transaction language. Photos Hugo had taken of my stepson meeting with students behind the school. Testimony from 3 students who'd bought from him. Detailed records of Venmo transactions that matched the drug sale amounts. It was comprehensive and damning. I forwarded it to my lawyer with a note saying I was ready to move forward with filing. She responded within minutes. Said she'd have the papers ready by the end of day Tuesday. Asked if I was sure about this. I typed yes without hesitation and hit send. Around 2 in the afternoon, my husband's phone rang. I was in the living room folding laundry when I heard his voice change in the kitchen. He said hello normally, then went quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke again, his voice sounded hollow and distant. He thanked whoever was calling and hung up. I kept folding a towel, waiting. He walked into the living room and stood there looking at me like he didn't know what to say. I asked him what was wrong. He said that was the school resource officer calling about his son. The district attorney was moving forward with criminal charges for drug distribution to minors. My husband sat down on the couch and put his head in his hands. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 seconds. I set down the towel and asked what that meant exactly. He said his son might face actual criminal prosecution. Not just school suspension or community service, but real charges that could go on his permanent record. I nodded slowly and said I was sorry this was happening. My husband didn't respond, just sat there staring at nothing. Around 3:30, we heard the front door open. My stepson came home from the school and walked past the living room without looking at us. My husband stood up and called his name. My stepson stopped but didn't turn around. My husband told him to come sit down because they needed to talk. My stepson walked into the living room with his backpack still on. My husband explained what the resource officer had said about the charges. My stepson's face went completely white. He started shaking his head and saying no over and over. My husband tried to explain the situation calmly, but my stepson's voice got louder. He shouted that this wasn't fair and someone must have set him up. My husband told him to calm down so they could figure out what to do. My stepson threw his backpack across the room and stormed upstairs. We heard his bedroom door slam so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. My husband looked at me like he expected me to say something helpful, but I just picked up my laundry basket and carried it toward the kitchen. Behind me, I heard my husband following his son upstairs. Their voices came through the ceiling, muffled but clearly angry. My stepson was shouting about how everything was ruined and his father didn't understand anything. My husband's voice stayed lower, probably trying to calm him down. I started pulling vegetables from the fridge to make dinner. Carrots, potatoes, and onion. I lined them up on the counter and got out a cutting board. The shouting upstairs continued. Something hit the floor hard enough to shake the light fixture above me. Glass breaking. More shouting. I started peeling potatoes, letting the thin strips fall into the sink. The argument upstairs got louder. My stepson screamed that someone did this to him on purpose, that they wanted to destroy his life. My husband's voice rose too, telling him to stop breaking things and think rationally. I chopped an onion into small pieces, my eyes watering from the smell. Then I heard footsteps pounding down the stairs, fast and heavy. I turned toward the kitchen doorway just as my stepson appeared. His face was red and twisted with rage. He looked at me standing there with the knife in my hand and the cutting board in front of me. He said this was all my fault. I opened my mouth to respond, but he was already moving toward me. He shoved me hard with both hands against my shoulders. I stumbled backward and my hip hit the counter edge. Pain shot through my side. I tried to catch myself, but my feet tangled and I went down. My head cracked against the cabinet door on the way to the floor. White light exploded behind my eyes. I heard my husband yelling from somewhere above me, heard him running down the stairs. My stepson grabbed my arm and yanked me partially upright. His fingers dug into my skin hard enough that I knew there would be marks. My husband appeared in the doorway and grabbed his son from behind. He pulled him away from me and they struggled in the middle of the kitchen. My stepson was still trying to get to me, still screaming that I ruined everything. My husband dragged him backward out of the kitchen. Their footsteps thundered back up the stairs. I sat on the floor, touching the back of my head where it hit the cabinet. A knot was already forming, tender and hot under my fingers. My arm throbbed where my stepson had grabbed it. Red marks stood out against my skin in the shape of his fingers. The chair I'd been standing near was knocked over on its side. I pulled my phone from my pocket with shaking hands, took a photo of my arm with the finger marks clearly visible, took another photo from a different angle, switched to selfie mode, and photographed the side of my head, trying to capture the swelling bump. Photographed the overturned chair. My hands were steadier now. I heard my husband's voice upstairs, still raised but not shouting anymore. Heard a door close, not slam this time, just close firmly. Then footsteps coming back down the stairs. My husband appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at me sitting on the floor and his expression changed from angry to worried. He asked if I was okay. I said I hit my head pretty hard. He came closer and reached down to help me up. I let him pull me to my feet. He looked at my arm and saw the marks, looked at my head, asked again if I was okay. I said I didn't know yet. He nodded and opened his mouth to say something else. Then he said he knew his son was out of control, but could I please not call the police? I stared at him. He kept talking, saying his son was already facing criminal charges and adding assault charges on top of that would make everything so much worse. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I told him I needed to go to the emergency room. He asked if that was really necessary, or if I could just put some ice on it. I walked past him toward the front door. He followed me, asking where I was going. I said the emergency room like I just told him. He said he'd drive me. I said no, I'd drive myself. Got my purse and keys from the hall table. My husband stood there looking helpless and confused. Asked me to please think about what calling the police would do to his son's situation. I opened the front door and walked out without responding. Drove to the hospital with my head pounding and my arm throbbing. At the emergency room, I checked in and explained I'd been assaulted at home. The intake nurse's expression changed immediately. She took me back to an exam room within minutes. The doctor who came in was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes. She asked me what happened. I told her everything. About my stepson shoving me and grabbing my arm. About hitting my head on the cabinet. She examined the bump on my head carefully. Checked my vision and asked about dizziness or nausea. Then she looked at my arm and the finger-shaped bruises. She asked if there was any other history of violence in the home. I pulled up the photos on my phone, showed her the pictures of my hives from the lavender poisoning, explained about my severe allergy and how my stepson had deliberately contaminated my body wash. The doctor's face got very serious. She asked if I'd reported the poisoning. I said no, not yet. She said she needed to document everything for my medical records. She took new photographs of my head injury and my arm, photographed the old hive scars that were still faintly visible on my skin, wrote detailed notes about the assault and the prior poisoning incident. She asked if I felt safe going home. I said I wasn't sure. She gave me information about domestic violence resources and said my medical records would be available if I needed them for legal purposes. I thanked her and sat in the exam room after she left. Pulled out my phone and called Melissa. She answered on the second ring. I told her what happened. I told her about my stepson attacking me and my husband asking me not to call the police. Melissa was quiet for a moment. Then she said this was the final piece of evidence we needed. Asked if I was ready to file the divorce papers tomorrow. I said yes without even hesitating. She said she'd have everything ready first thing in the morning. I hung up and sat there in the sterile exam room with the fluorescent lights humming above me. My head still hurt, but the pain felt distant now. The discharge nurse came in with paperwork and instructions for monitoring head injuries. I drove home around 10:30 that night. The house was dark except for the living room lamp. I walked in and found my husband sitting on the couch waiting for me. He stood up when he saw me, asked how I was. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled up the photos on my phone. The ones I took weeks ago of the dried lavender on my stepson's desk. I showed them to my husband. He squinted at the screen looking confused. I explained that this was dried lavender, that I found it displayed on his son's desk the same day I had a severe allergic reaction. My husband's face changed as he started to understand. I showed him the photos of my contaminated body wash bottle. Showed him the pictures of my hives spreading up my neck. Pulled up my medical records from my allergist documenting my severe lavender allergy. Told him his son had deliberately put lavender in my body wash, knowing it would hurt me. Then left the evidence out on his desk like a trophy. My husband stared at the phone screen for a long time. I watched his face carefully. Watched him trying to process what I was showing him. He finally looked up at me and said maybe it was just a prank that went too far. Maybe his son didn't realize how serious my allergy was. I felt something break inside my chest. I told him I'd explained my allergy multiple times. Told him his son knew exactly what he was doing. My husband said his son was just a teenager who made a stupid mistake. I said poisoning someone isn't a mistake. He asked what I expected him to do about it. That's when I realized he was asking me to let it go. To forgive attempted poisoning the same way I was supposed to forgive everything else. And I told him his son tried to poison me and then displayed the evidence like a trophy because he thought he could get away with it. My husband rubbed his face with both hands, said his son was already facing criminal charges and didn't need more problems. I asked if he understood that his son deliberately tried to hurt me. He said he understood it looked bad, but maybe we could talk to his son about it. Make sure he understood how serious it was. I stared at my husband and realized I was looking at a stranger. I told him I needed to think about everything that happened. I needed space to figure out what came next. He said his son was just scared and acting out, which made me realize he still didn't get it. His son tried to poison me on purpose, left the proof out where I could see it, then attacked me hard enough to leave bruises and a bump on my head. My husband kept saying we could work through this as a family. I asked him how we work through attempted poisoning. He didn't have an answer for that, just kept circling back to his son being troubled and needing support. I pointed out that I needed support too after being poisoned and assaulted. He said he knew that, but his son was still a kid who made mistakes. I stopped arguing around 2 a.m. My head hurt too much and nothing I said was getting through to him anyway. He never asked if I was okay. Never apologized for what his son did. Just kept defending and making excuses like always. Monday morning, I woke up early and packed a bag while my husband was in the shower and threw clothes in without really looking at what I grabbed. My head still ached from hitting the cabinet. The bruises on my arm had turned dark purple overnight. I heard the shower turn off and moved faster. He came out of the bathroom with a towel around his waist and stopped when he saw my bag. Asked where I was going. I told him I was staying with my sister until I figured things out. Said I didn't feel safe here anymore. He tried to step closer, but I moved back. He promised he would talk to his son about boundaries. Said we could set up some ground rules and make sure nothing like this happened again. I stared at him and realized he still thought this was about better communication. Like his son poisoning me was a boundary issue we could solve with a family meeting. I picked up my bag and walked past him. He followed me down the stairs, calling my name and asking me to wait, saying we should talk more before I made any big decisions. I kept walking to my car, got in and locked the doors, saw him standing in the doorway in his towel looking confused and upset. I backed out of the driveway while he was still talking. My sister lives 20 minutes away in a smaller house she bought after her divorce. She was at work when I got there but had given me a key years ago. I let myself in and sat on her couch staring at nothing. My phone buzzed with texts from my husband. I turned it off. Sat there for maybe an hour just breathing and trying to process that I'd actually left. Then I turned my phone back on and called Melissa. She answered on the second ring like she'd been waiting. I told her to file everything. She asked if I was sure and I said yes without even pausing to think about it. She said the papers would be ready by the end of day and we could serve him tomorrow. I thanked her and hung up. Felt relieved and scared at the same time. Like I'd just jumped off something high and was still falling. Tuesday afternoon, my phone lit up with a text from Melissa. Just said it was done. A process server had delivered divorce papers and a temporary restraining order to my husband at his office. I sat on my sister's couch holding my phone and trying to process that I'd just ended my marriage. My sister came home and found me there. She didn't ask questions, just made tea and sat with me while I stared at the wall. My phone started ringing around 4. My husband's name kept popping up. I didn't answer. He called 17 times in 2 hours. Finally stopped and started leaving voicemails instead. I listened to them later that night. The first few were confused, asking what was happening and why I'd done this. Then they got angry, saying I was overreacting and being dramatic. Then they turned pleading, begging me to come home so we could talk, saying he loved me and we could fix this. Not once did he mention the poisoning or the assault. Like those things didn't even matter compared to me filing for divorce. Wednesday morning, I met Melissa at her office to prepare for the emergency restraining order hearing. She had organized all my evidence into a presentation on her laptop. Photos of the lavender on his desk, pictures of my contaminated body wash, medical records from my allergist showing my severe allergy, photos of my hives spreading up my neck, screenshots of the racist messages, videos of him verbally abusing me, medical records from the ER documenting my head injury and bruises. She'd put it all together in a way that clearly showed 3 years of getting worse and worse until it ended with poisoning and assault. I sat there looking at my life laid out in slides and felt sick. Melissa asked if I was okay, and I said I didn't know. She said the judge would see this for what it was, that I had a strong case and would be protected. That afternoon, Melissa called to say my husband's lawyer had contacted her. They wanted to negotiate, suggested couples counseling, and offered to send his son to live with his mother. Melissa asked what I wanted to do. I said we weren't negotiating. She sounded pleased when she told them we'd see them in court. My husband called again that night from a different number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. He was crying, asking how I could do this to him, saying he didn't understand how we got here. I told him his son tried to poison me and then displayed the evidence like a trophy, then attacked me and left bruises. He said he knew his son messed up, but we could work through it. I hung up on him. Thursday afternoon, Melissa texted that my stepson had been formally charged with possession with intent to distribute. The school had handed over all the evidence to the police: screenshots of his burner account, messages arranging sales, student testimony, everything Hugo had helped document. My husband called from yet another number I didn't recognize. I answered and heard him sobbing, asking how everything fell apart so fast, saying his son's life was ruined and our marriage was over and he didn't understand what happened. I told him he chose this when he laughed at his son abusing me, when he called attempted poisoning a prank, when he asked me not to call the police after being assaulted. He said I was being cruel. I hung up and blocked that number too. The following Tuesday, we had our court hearing for the restraining order. I sat in the courtroom wearing a nice dress my sister had bought me. My husband sat on the other side with his lawyer. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. The judge called me to testify. I walked up and put my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. Then I told her everything. 3 years of verbal abuse, the racial slurs he called jokes, the physical intimidation that started small and got worse, how his father laughed and made excuses every time. I described finding the lavender on his desk, showed her the photos of my contaminated body wash, my medical records proving my severe allergy, pictures of my hives spreading up my neck toward my face. Then I told her about the assault, how he shoved me into the cabinet and grabbed my arm hard enough to leave dark bruises. Showed her the photos from the ER, the bump on my head, the purple marks on my arm. Melissa stood at the front of the courtroom and opened her laptop to display the first slide. The judge leaned forward as photos of the dried lavender on my stepson's desk appeared on the screen. Then came pictures of my contaminated body wash bottles with the lavender pieces visible at the bottom. Medical records from my allergist showing years of documented severe reactions to lavender filled the next slide. The photos of my hives spreading up my neck and face made the judge's expression harden. Melissa clicked through screenshots of the racist messages my stepson had sent, videos I'd secretly recorded of him verbally abusing me and calling me slurs, and finally the ER documentation showing the bump on my head and the dark bruises on my arm. Monica had provided a written statement detailing 3 years of psychological abuse patterns and the escalating danger she'd witnessed. The judge asked to see the lavender photos again and studied them for a long time. She asked Melissa to confirm that I had clearly communicated my allergy to both my husband and stepson multiple times, and Melissa pulled up text messages where I'd explicitly warned them both about keeping lavender away from me. My husband's lawyer stood up and started talking about how teenage boys make poor choices and don't always think through consequences. He said my stepson was going through a difficult time with the divorce and was acting out because he felt abandoned. The judge held up her hand and cut him off mid-sentence. She said that deliberately contaminating someone's personal care products with a substance they're severely allergic to isn't a teenage mistake or poor judgment. She said it's calculated harm with intent to cause physical injury, and displaying the evidence afterward shows consciousness of guilt and enjoyment of the suffering caused. She granted the restraining order effective immediately, and said my stepson was prohibited from coming within 500 feet of me or contacting me in any way. My husband made a choking sound from across the courtroom but didn't say anything. 2 weeks passed and I stayed at my sister's house, sleeping better than I had in years despite everything falling apart. Melissa called to tell me that my stepson's criminal case was moving forward with formal charges for drug distribution and assault. She said the district attorney was treating it seriously because of the evidence of ongoing sales to minors and the documented medical harm from the assault. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, and I asked if I needed to attend. She said no, that this was just procedural, but she'd keep me informed of everything that happened. Thursday evening, my sister's friend texted her that she'd seen my husband at the courthouse looking completely broken. She said he sat alone in the hallway before the hearing with his head in his hands, and when she tried to say hello, he didn't even seem to recognize her. My sister asked if I wanted to know these details, and I said yes, that I needed to understand what was happening even if it felt strange to hear about his pain. The friend said my stepson had been there too, wearing a suit that looked too big for him, and he'd cried during the hearing when the charges were read out loud. Part of me felt satisfaction knowing they were finally facing consequences, but another part felt tired and sad that it had come to this point. The divorce proceedings moved faster than I expected because my husband didn't contest anything. Melissa explained that his lawyer had advised him that fighting would mean all the abuse evidence becoming public record during court proceedings. She said they were worried about how that would affect my stepson's criminal case, that having detailed documentation of his violent behavior and racial harassment would make him look worse to the judge handling the drug and assault charges. My husband signed everything his lawyer put in front of him without arguing about the house or the alimony or any of the financial terms. Melissa said she'd never seen someone give up so completely in a divorce case, that usually there's at least some negotiation over assets. I told her I thought he finally understood that he'd destroyed everything by protecting his son instead of protecting me. She said that might be true, or he might just be too overwhelmed to fight, but either way, it was working in my favor. The paperwork moved through the system quickly because neither side was slowing things down with disputes. 6 weeks after I'd left with my suitcase, the divorce was finalized in a brief court appearance where the judge reviewed our settlement agreement. I got the house with all its equity, substantial monthly alimony for the next 5 years, and a permanent restraining order against my stepson that would remain in effect indefinitely. My husband got visitation rights with his son, and the knowledge that his enabling had created this disaster. The judge asked if I was certain I wanted to proceed with these terms, and I said yes without hesitation. She signed the papers and declared our marriage legally dissolved. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time, like I'd won something important but lost something too. Melissa walked me to my car and said I should be proud of myself for getting out safely with my rights protected. I thanked her for everything she'd done and drove back to my sister's house to pack up my things. I'm living back in the house now with new locks on all the doors and a security system that monitors every entrance. The first night back, I walked through every room and felt like I was seeing it all differently, noticing how much of myself I'd erased trying to make them comfortable. My stepson is facing 12 months of probation and 200 hours of community service for the drug charges after taking a plea deal. The assault charge is still pending because the prosecutor wants to use it as leverage if he violates probation. I heard through someone who knows someone that he's living with his mother now and working at a grocery store to pay his court fees. My husband moved into an apartment across town and apparently spends most of his time visiting his son or sitting alone. I'm in therapy twice a week with a new therapist, not Monica, because our relationship was too tied to the court case. Some days I feel strong and clear about everything I did to escape. Other days I feel exhausted by what it took and wonder if I could have handled things differently. My husband sends emails every few days asking if we can talk or meet for coffee. I delete them without reading past the subject line because I know he still doesn't understand that protecting his son's feelings was more important to him than protecting me from harm. Last week he sent flowers to the house and I threw them away immediately, checking first to make sure they weren't lavender. I'm safe now in ways that matter, with financial security and legal protection, and a house that belongs only to me. But I'm also alone in a space that holds 3 years of bad memories, and I'm learning that winning doesn't always feel like victory when the cost was this high.